Imagine waking up to the sound of your own death. Not a quiet, peaceful passing, but the visceral, shattering terror of a violent plane crash. Now imagine that sound is blasting from every radio, every baby monitor, and every police scanner in your entire town at 3:17 a.m. That is how the residents of Oakhaven, Washington, were initiated into a mystery that defied physics, time, and sanity. For 4 minutes and 12 seconds on a cold night in November 1998, a deafening localized broadcast seized the radio waves. It was a chaotic symphony of stall warnings, shattering metal, and two distinct voices screaming for altitude. It sounded like the final moments of a cockpit voice recorder, a black box, telling the tragic tale of a commercial flight descending into the mountains. Search and rescue teams mobilized immediately. They scoured the dense, wet forests surrounding Blackwood Ridge, looking for smoke, wreckage, and fire. They found nothing. No missing planes were reported across the entire country. The event was labeled mass hysteria, an elaborate prank perpetrated by someone with a powerful rogue transmitter. That was the only logical explanation, until the audio tapes were cleaned up. The investigation became a primal horror when forensic analysts confirmed the impossible identity of the voices screaming in the cockpit. The man desperately yelling the coordinates of his own demise was not an airline pilot. He was Arthur Vance, the mild-mannered librarian of Oakhaven, and the weeping co-pilot, Sarah Jenkins, a waitress at the local diner. At the exact moment the broadcast aired, the moment they were recorded dying in a crash, both Arthur and Sarah were confirmed to be sound asleep in their separate beds, 5 miles away. This is the story of the Midnight Signal, the investigation of a terrifying broadcast that recorded the death of 2 living people. Oakhaven is a town built in a valley, surrounded by the oppressive silence of the Cascade foothills. The geography itself is a character in this mystery. High concentrations of magnetite and iron deposits earned the area the nickname the Static Belt. Cell service dies here. Radio signals are notoriously erratic. This isolation only amplified the psychological impact of the intrusion. Sheriff Elias Thorne, a hard-nosed pragmatist, initially treated the broadcast as an illegal use of the spectrum. He needed physical evidence. He needed wreckage. Instead, he was handed paradoxes. The broadcast contained clues that made no sense. At the height of the panic, the female voice screams, "The church! Watch the church spire! We're too low." Thorne checked the church, the only one in town with a spire, not a scratch. A plane low enough to hit that target would have been seen, felt, and heard by hundreds of people. The most unnerving detail came from the audio analysts. The crash recording was layered with a pervasive, deep thrumming and infrasonic anomaly. Sounds are typically only produced by massive geological stress or high-yield seismic events. This wasn't a sound effect. It was the unique physical signature of extreme, localized energy release. When Thorne questioned Arthur Vance, the librarian was a wreck. He was found clutching his wife, Martha, smelling of sweat and ozone. He didn't deny the voice was his. He confessed to a horrifying sensation, a memory of a moment he had never lived. "I remember the smell of ozone, Sheriff," Arthur wept. "I remember the terrible pressure in my chest, and I remember looking out the window, and the trees. The trees were upside down. I know how the instruments work now. I know where the hydraulic lines are." Sarah Jenkins was equally afflicted. She told police she felt cold and nauseous every time she heard the sound of her own voice crying for help. She was experiencing the profound trauma of pre-traumatic stress. With the town verging on hysteria, the FCC arrived. Agent David Miller, a clinical spectrum analyzer, focused on triangulation. He needed to find the illegal high-wattage transmitter. The analysis eventually led them out of the town to a remote, desolate patch of land near the base of Blackwood Ridge, known locally as the Hollows. The sight was instantly chilling. It was a circle of scorched earth, roughly 12 feet wide. The ground was fused into glass, emanating residual heat. Yet there were no tracks, no tire marks, and crucially, no remnants of a tower, generator, or transmitter. The signal hadn't come from the surface. The readings indicated a pulse emanating from deep beneath the ground. Agent Miller's professional skepticism evaporated when they recovered a piece of debris from the fused soil. It was a pocket watch, melted and brassy. The glass shield evaporated. Engraved on the back, "To Arthur, Love Martha, 1998. It was an exact, identical, physically ruined duplicate of the watch currently sitting in Arthur Vance's kitchen drawer. The conclusion was inescapable. Whatever happened at the Hollows had generated enough localized energy to tear a physical object from Arthur's present and deposit its destroyed remnant in the ground. The midnight signal was not a radio broadcast. It was a temporal bleed. The voices they heard were the ghost of a black box, recording a moment of violent existence in a reality that had not yet stabilized. The psychological horror intensified. The town began to fear Arthur and Sarah, treating them not as victims, but as contagious carriers of a cursed fate. The pressure of this shared delusion pushed Arthur to the brink. His journals became frantic, obsessed with the notion that he was waiting for the loop to close, that the crash was destiny. Then, 7 days after the first event, at the precise time of 3:17 a.m., the signal returned. This time, the broadcast was clearer. It contained the sounds of static, an explosion, and two voices arguing frantically. "I don't care what the spectral analysis says, Miller. It's coming from the ground. Sheriff, that's impossible. It's a reflection." "It's not a reflection. It's an echo." Sheriff Thorne and Agent Miller were sitting in the station listening to the broadcast live. They instantly recognized the voices. Their own. They were listening to a conversation they had not yet had. The radio played a 10-second snippet, ending with the gruff voice of Thorne yelling, "Get down! The glass!" followed by the violent sound of shattering windows. Thorne, pale and desperate, lunged for Miller, tackling him beneath the dispatch desk. Barely 3 seconds later, the electrical transformer on the pole outside the station, overloaded by an unseen surge, exploded. The blast shattered the front windows, spraying glass shrapnel across the room. The broadcast had predicted the future. Not by years, but by moments. The mystery was solved, but the truth was terrifying. The midnight signal was not replaying an event. It was transmitting an event that was destined to occur, proving that time was elastic and that fate was sealed. Arthur and Sarah's crash was coming, and Thorne realized the cockpit wasn't a plane. The symptoms, the spinning compass, the inversion, the metallic taste, were the signature of the temporal anomaly itself. Thorne and Miller raced back to the Hollows. They found Arthur and Sarah standing in the center of the scorched circle, locked together, their faces frozen in expressions of absolute dread. The air around them shimmered with a low, violet light. They were screaming the dialogue from the original tape, acting out their own pre-recorded deaths. "Pull up! Terrain!" Arthur shrieked, gripping the empty air. "Don't look out the window. We're erasing." Sarah wept. Thorne could not reach them. A high-pressure, vibrating force field repelled him. He watched, helpless, as the light intensified, distorting the world. For a fleeting, horrifying moment, Thorne saw the trees reflected upside down in the violet sky above, exactly as Arthur had described. The forest had become the phantom cockpit. Arthur suddenly stopped screaming. His eyes, wide and completely black, fixed on Sheriff Thorne. His voice, amplified and unnatural, spoke with a chilling finality. "We have reached the signal horizon," Arthur announced. Then the violet light imploded. It collapsed into a pinprick of white heat and vanished. The pressure released. Arthur Vance and Sarah Jenkins were gone. There was no smoke, no blood, no struggle. Only the silent, smoking earth. They hadn't died in a crash. They had simply been erased from this timeline. Sheriff Thorne resigned, He carried the burden of the impossible until his death, forever convinced that Arthur and Sarah had merely tuned into a different frequency and were still flying through a dimension just adjacent to our own. The official conclusion remains inconclusive. A combination of geological anomalies, electromagnetic distortion, and mass delusion. The FCC filed the case away, haunted by the future broadcast tape they could never explain. But the fear never left Oakhaven. In 2018, 20 years later, a commercial flight passing over the Cascade foothills reported strange interference on the emergency channel. The pilot reported hearing garbled voices, a man screaming about a church spire, and a woman whispering about inverted trees. The midnight signal had found a new, distant receiver. The horrifying truth of Oakhaven is that the crash did happen. But the broadcast was not a recording of the past. It was a warning from the future, trapped in a relentless, haunting loop. And the signal is still out there, drifting through the static, waiting for the right moment, the right frequency, and the next person to hear the sound of their own destiny. It raises the most terrifying question of all. If you heard the sound of your own death on the radio, could you ever truly be safe?